Okay, so let's start with anyway, I'm from Scotland, and I met Buddhism in my 20s, and it was one of the teachings that, even though the first time I heard the teachings, not much sticks the first time you hear things. We have a lot of sort of obstacles. Anyway, being Urs probably know, I met Buddhism in India. And, I was in my 20s. I didn't have a lot of other responsibilities. I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. So I didn't expect it to become Buddhist and become a Buddhist nun, but somehow the teachings impacted me deeply, and I decided, that's what I wanted to do, give up the life and try and practice and study the teachings as much as possible. So I became a nun at 27, and I've been doing it for the last 25, 30 years, trying to more deeply understand the teachings of the Buddha and, integrate it into my mind and my heart, so as we all are really, so and then I came to America. I spent about 3 years in India when I was first ordained. And then because of health problems, I came to America. And I've predominantly been in the States, living and working at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's house, our spiritual teacher for this organization, who passed away last year, offering service and occasionally teaching, leading meditations, practices, but mostly in the context of serving at my teacher's house. That's mostly what I've done. My practice of purifying and collecting merit, hopefully, so I can understand the teachings more and share that with others. So yeah, that's since my teacher passed away last year, I've come to Vajrapani, and just being of whatever help and assistance I can here, and giving some teachings and, offering some things to Ocean of Compassion at the same time. So that's me in a nutshell. So during this class, I'm going to share, actually, I have a small slideshow that I'm going to use this evening. And so as I mentioned, the topic of this class is the Four Noble Truths. So, but what I wanted to start with was just go over again the life story of the Buddha. So I'm going to do that through a small slideshow that I have. So we're going to go into that after we do the meditation and motivation. So let's just get ourselves into a sort of comfortable position. As we know, at the start of teachings, all of us here have engaged in lots of teachings. And so we know that at the beginning, really of our day, of our practice, momentarily throughout the day, it's always very good. So that's what we're going to do here. And we can do a quick scan of the body from the crown, using the breath as well, just breathing normally. But with the breath, breathing in and, going through the body from the crown. And just as we breathe in and we find any tension, maybe in the face, around the teeth, around the mouth, around the brow, neck, we just go down and breathe into that and give ourselves a shower of energy with the in-breath, and breathe out any stress or tension on the out-breath. So we could just do that meditation of going through, body scan from the crown all the way down to the toes, maybe doing about 10, 15 breaths just through the body. Breathing in, allowing the freshness of the breath, the softness of the breath to release and relax any tension as we just, go through our whole body, the outside and inside of the body. And then for a couple of minutes, just settling our mind actually on the breath, the process of the breathing, either as it goes in and out of the nostrils, just breathing normally again, finding our normal breath, and watching, being one almost with the breath as it goes in and out of the nostrils, that process. Or sometimes to ground our energy more, it's easier to bring the awareness to the abdomen and the rising and falling of the abdomen as the breath goes in and out, just being at that place with the abdomen. Or if you have another object that you use as your meditation, just settle on that object just for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Again, just this settling of the mind. And then with your own motivation for coming this evening, just taking a moment to connect with that, clarify that in your mind. So again, on top of our own motivation, what we discover, you know, especially the more we study and practice the teachings, that everything in our life is motivated by this wish for happiness, to find happiness, to find kind of peace, everlasting peace, some kind of peace and satisfaction. But so far, you know, and especially as we investigate the Four Noble Truths, what we find is that peace or happiness, satisfaction that we try to find kind of always eludes us. We're not actually, you know, always able to find it, grasp it, or hold on to it. Is because there's a fundamental confusion or wiring that we have in our lives that causes us to look for happiness sort of in the wrong direction, in the wrong way, as we've, you know, most of us now have already discovered through listening to some of the teachings and developing that in our mind. So here what we're going to do tonight is, again, just have an overview of the life story of the Buddha, and also investigate the first teaching that he gave on the Four Noble Truths, you know, that basically elucidates, you know, why happiness eludes us and how within us we have this potential to achieve everlasting peace and happiness, how we can open that within ourselves in a step-by-step process. And also we try to motivate that each, by listening to the teachings and reflecting on the teachings, that we're also able to benefit others through whatever wisdom, whatever knowledge, whatever awakening we have and realizations we have, may be able to develop our heart and mind to be of greater benefit to other sentient beings. Trying to hold this some kind of feeling of universal responsibility for our own, in first case for our own happiness, but then and also to offer that, to share that with all sentient beings. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, how is the screen going, Bay? Is it going in and out, or it's okay so far?
It's okay.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, try again. Share. Here we go. Okay. So we'll go to the first one, sorry. We're way down too low. So here, so we all know Lama Zopa Rinpoche. This is actually where I lived before, in Rinpoche's house in Washington. So really what we understand from the first teaching is from this quote that Rinpoche gives, happiness and suffering are dependent upon our own mind, upon our interpretation. They do not come from outside, from others. All our happiness and all our suffering are created by ourselves, by our own mind. So although this is easy to hear, I think we've all heard it before many times, still it's very difficult to get that real experience of that, to not blame, to not kind of think that, some of my unhappiness, some of the bad conditions out there are coming from something external. Would you agree? There's a sort of, we have a very strong wiring to feel that a lot of our causes of problems come from something external to us, So this is what we discover when we study and reflect on the teachings more, and we start to integrate them into our own hearts and minds, that actually, more and more we get a sort of realization and an understanding that, really everything, all our life, sort of our own inner world. So this is especially when we start to, go through the Four Noble Truths. Hopefully we'll get more of a understanding of that, or maybe a bit deeper understanding of what you have already, as we just go through and touch on the Four Noble Truths, and also a little bit looking at the life story of the Buddha, what he did in order to get that deeper understanding into his heart and mind. So, of course, I wasn't sure who was coming tonight, so I just thought I'd give a general presentation of how to listen to the teachings. There's many ways that we try to listen to the teachings, but one of them is, most importantly, just with an open mind, because especially when we sort of touch on the Four Noble Truths, it can sometimes be kind of an uncomfortable subject, because there's a lot of talk about suffering. I don't know if when we first met Buddhism and then we heard all these discussions about suffering, it get a little bit heavy, So what's important to do is listen to it with an open mind, or as we sometimes say, another way of listening is to listen to the teachings with the view that the Buddha is like the doctor, He's someone who has been through the experience of, over many lifetimes of developing his mind on the spiritual path and achieved, as what his name means, full awakening. Buddha, the name of the Buddha means fully awakened or enlightened being. So what we, so as much as possible, we try to have this view that when we listen to teachers, that the Buddha is someone who's sort of fully developed wisdom and compassion, fully developed and also reduced all the negative states of mind. So again, so that just as we would go to a doctor when we have some kind of disease or problem wrong with us, we would listen. If we know it's a good doctor, we would listen full-heartedly and openly to get a correct diagnosis. Then similarly like that, what we and as we listen, try and investigate what the Buddha has discovered and see if it's a truth for us. So we usually listen to the teachings with the view that the Buddha is like the doctor, and then with the view that the Sangha, the Dharma, the teachings that he gives are like the medicine that heals the problem, the negativities in the mind. And that the Sangha, there's also the Sangha community, or we can say ourselves, those who perhaps are more advanced on the path than us, not fully developed, but advanced on the path are like the nurses, they're helping to help us support and nourish and heal us on the spiritual path. So this is the kind of view we try to have as we listen to the teachings, because basically the Four Noble Truths is a diagnosis of what's wrong with us. It's a diagnosis of our confused mind. It's a diagnosis that, yes, there's no way, it's not possible to achieve happiness from anything external to us, food, possessions, relationships, family. Because actually the fundamental cause of suffering is something that's within our mind, like a sort of long-term cancer or disease or problem that we've had for a long time. But the Buddha discovered that it exists within our own hearts and mind, So if we have some kind of deeper feeling, as we did for many of us when we first met the teaching, we had some feeling our own suffering. We had some connection with that. I think that's what brings us to the Dharma. Certainly that's what brought me to the Dharma in India when I was very young. I was like really confused about what am I doing with my life, as we often are in our early 20s, and also we get fed so much from the outside about what we should do, how we should be. So that actually on top of the fundamental, challenges that we have in the mind, the fundamental delusion in the mind can create more kind of suffering, for us individually. And that's what I felt, certainly. That's what brought me to India, which was a blessing in disguise, because I felt like very confused about the purpose of my life. And I think most of us discover that when we meet Buddhism, when we reach out for spiritual teachings, it's because we're connecting with our individual suffering, some sort of mental suffering that's going on, or some sort of, lingering dissatisfaction, discomfort in the mind that we can't really put our finger on, but we know we need help. We know we're confused about something, something's not working. So so this is why, as much as possible, and it's very good when you're in that state, actually, even when you've been practicing Dharma for a long time, sometimes we go to a teaching, we're like, oh yeah, I know that already, I know this already, I've heard that, we can do that, that's fine, we all do that. But as much as we can, engage or listen to any teaching, any talk on the Dharma with that kind of open, fresh mind, like maybe I haven't heard this before, or maybe I haven't thought about it in this way before, there's always something you're going to catch, something you're going to get that sort of, I think, helps to shift your mind, to like a seed that's planted that just, springs a little realization or something in your mind. I'm sure there's always going to be something. So that's why, and as much as we get that we're in this kind of cycle of suffering, that much more with qualified teachers, Not that I'm saying I'm qualified by any means, I'm just have a little bit of knowledge to share at this point, So anyway, so to always kind of try and hold in whatever teaching that investigative, curious mind to see, even if there's a syllable, a word, a sentence in there of that teaching that I can take away with me that adds to my knowledge, that is able to help me develop something more on the spiritual path. So that's always very important, to keep that open mind, like an open pot, an open vessel, where something can pour in. Not an upside down vessel. Upside down things can't go in. There's these three analogies of the pot when we're listening to teachings. We want not to be an upside down pot, because nothing can really go into the upside down pot. It's almost like we're just sitting there with our hands closed, you know, like this, you know, kind of folded hands and situations, maybe just even mentally a little bit where we're doing that. There's also the analogy of the leaky pot, where we hear things, and I have to say, I have that tendency sometimes. I hear something, even, and then it just goes out, it just flows through the bottom of the pot. I think we all have that fault sometimes. Or there's the analogy of the best one is to be this pot that's just upside down, you know, and we're open and we're able to engage and hear the teaching and at least to digest and hold and retain something of the teaching after we've heard it. So to really have that motivation, be like that at the beginning of the teachings, to be able to kind of hold and hear and retain at least some part of what we've heard, something that's meaningful to us that we can go away and digest or chew on. Which comes to this next part. So as many of you have seen this saying before, you know, from the Buddha, O bhikshus and the wise, just as goldsmith tests his gold by burning, cutting and rubbing it, so you must examine my words and accept them, but not merely out of reverence for the Buddha. So I think you might agree that generally in the West, Buddhism's getting a better reputation. It does have a reputation for, I think it's well known, you know, that in Buddhism generally, we don't accept things just because the Buddha said, because a creator said. And that's what certainly appealed to me when I met the Dharma, you know, when I was younger in India. And one of the first things the teacher said was that we weren't to accept anything on blind faith. But we were to try and, you know, really listen with an open mind, but also use our own intellect, our own discernment to really see if what the Buddha said is true in our, in our experience. Take some time before we throw it out. And if we don't throw it out, well, best not to throw it out. If we don't understand something initially, is to put it on the back burner. Just leave it there for now. And perhaps later, as we develop and digest more of the teachings, that will become more prominent and we'll have a more deeper understanding of that part of the teaching. So here, based on perhaps having a newer audience, I find either for me, it's always good to just refresh my mind on the way how to. So what I wanted to start with as a general introduction here was because Land of Medicine Buddha, how many of you have been to Land of Medicine Buddha? I know Bay and Urs have definitely been. Ruth, have you been? Kenan? Kenan? Yeah,
Yes.
you've been. Oh, so we've all been. So some of you may have already been to the wish-fulfilling temple. And there, so I'm going to share a different document at the moment. I'll stop this share. At the wish-fulfilling temple, it's about halfway up, not completely as far as the new stupa, which I don't know if some of you have seen that already, but let me just share the screen first. The Medicine Buddha temple, there's really nice images that were painted by two great artists, two Tibetan, well, actually Nepali artists, Gelik and Kunkin, who most of you have met. And of course, some of you would have seen these depictions of the Buddha's life story. I don't know if you would have connected exactly what it was. Sometimes there isn't always, they don't always have signs up about what it is. And there's so much to see there at the temple, but I find it very inspiring to go around. There's 12 images that sort of depict the life story of the Buddha. And of course, there's a Namasya, you would have already seen these maybe many times, yeah? Namasya works at Land of Medicine Buddha in the Tara Redwood School. But either way, I find it they're just beautifully done. And it's a nice way just to kind of remind ourselves and to go through again, not just, from time to time, I find it very helpful, not just, either the biography of the Buddha's life or the biography of great masters, to sit and reflect on their life story, because it brings a lot of inspiration to the heart and mind, So what I wanted to do was just go through this, just in a brief way, the life story of the Buddha. Again, it was a sort of introduction to the Four Noble Truths. The first teaching that was taught by the Buddha, to go through and make it a little bit more clear, what happened as the Buddha descended into this world. So there's many, just to give a broader overview, there's going to be many Buddhas. There's many Buddhas who have come into this world. There's many Buddhas who will come again there's been many in the past, and there's going to be many again in the future that will come into this realm, the human realm, and give teachings, turn the wheel of Dharma and give Dharma teachings. So and we're in this kind of period. So on the premise that our mind's beginningless, there's been, eons and eons of existence that we've existed in, and there's going to be eons in the past of life, human life form, since mind is beginningless. There's going to be, in this particular eon, or kalpa, which again is a period of thousands of years, it's been predicted in the Buddhist canon or texts that there will be 1,000 Buddhas coming to this world system. Shakyamuni Buddha is the fourth Buddha who descended into this world. And Maitreya Buddha, and actually Maitreya Buddha is depicted here. This is his Pure Land where he abides. He will be the next coming Buddha, who will not come for some thousands of years after this particular Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings have declined. So now we're in the period of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings. And each Buddha that comes to this world perform what we call 12 deeds, or I like to call them 12 enlightening deeds. So every time a being who's going to become a Buddha comes to this realm, this human world, they perform these kind of 12 deeds or activities, or they show these certain actions, that again, they perform these deeds to inspire us to practice on the path, to see that as a human, we also have the potential to become enlightened. And they always perform these deeds in the holy place of Bodh Gaya in India. Well, the main deed that they perform there is the deed of actually achieving enlightenment. Each Buddha who comes to the human realm will always achieve enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. That's why it's a very, very, very powerful place. Bodh Gaya is in India, in a place called Bihar, one of the poorest states in India. And it's it's got this incredible power, and because it's a sort of power place in this world system somehow, where all the Buddhas come there and show the deed of achieving enlightenment. So to backtrack, just as a brief overview of the Buddha's life, the Buddha was born in northern India, and his mother was Queen Mayadeva. So she was the wife of King Shuddadana. And, they ruled a realm there. They were called the Shakya clan, and they were rulers of their certain realm or place in North India. So the night that the queen conceived the Buddha, she had a dream of a white elephant. So you can see this in the second. I'm going to go between 1 and 2 here. You can see this in the second depiction here. There's a queen in the palace, and she's having some dream, and what she's dreaming of is this white elephant descending into her womb. So of course, a white elephant's a very powerful animal, and it's also the white shows the purity or the rareness of an animal. I mean, I think there's on occasion there's been a white elephant, but it's something very rare. So that this dream was showing that the queen was going to give birth to a very special being. And the picture above just shows that this is Shakyamuni Buddha. So before he descended into this realm as a Buddha, he was in the Tushita Pure Land. This is a Pure Land where the Maitreya Buddha abides. And he was receiving teachings, and he was he decided that he would come into this realm. He was already a very high level bodhisattva, but he was descending into this realm to kind of show us the deed of achieving enlightenment. How do we do it? So you could say there's many ways of looking at the Buddha's life story, but in this aspect, we're looking at it from the view of the Buddha wasn't fully enlightened yet. He was coming from a higher realm existence, decided to come into this realm and show the deed of enlightenment. So, to show us humans how we can achieve enlightenment in a human body. So this is him, coming, with all these retinue here in the dream, and he's descending into the womb of Queen Mayadeva. So unfortunately, this image is, I took this from the Mandala magazine, because I didn't have images of all the pictures. So I took this from the magazine, but unfortunately, they got this image wrong. It should be, they got it in the wrong order. The rest is all in the right order apart for this one. So there's an image up there in the temple of Queen Mayadeva. She was pregnant, and then typically at that time when the queen is going to give birth, she goes back to her family home, and her family were actually from the border of Nepal. In Nepal, so she was quite close to expecting her child. So she was driving through India and going back to Nepal. She was already crossed the border over to Nepal into Lumbini when she started all the pains of giving childbirth. And so she ended up giving childbirth in the forest, but it's said that her retinue maidens, she went into the forest and she basically held on to the branch of a tree. She stood up and gave birth, and the Buddha came out of her side. She experienced very little pain, and she had this kind of miraculous birth of the Buddha coming out of her side, and was able to stand up and express that he was the one coming to the world to alleviate suffering. So there was a kind of all these auspicious signs around his birth, as you can imagine, coming out the side of his mother, and then standing up and expressing that he was the kind of supreme one in the world who was going to come and relieve suffering. So, of course, the mother went back to the palace, and then about a few days after, actually, he passed away. She gave birth to the Buddha. And also after the king hearing about the auspicious signs around the Buddha's birth, or Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha at that time, they called him Siddhartha, the king became a little bit nervous because he had this, he was concerned that his son might become a spiritual being, and he had, of course, great ambitions for his son to become a king, to take over the kingdom. So about a week after the Buddha was born, the Queen Maya actually passed away, and she was reborn in the realm of Tushita. And at some point after the Buddha actually became enlightened, there was a period when he went back up to the realm of Tushita to teach his mother. And we celebrate that day every year around October, November, when the Buddha descended back down for Tushita after teaching his mother. So anyway, in this case, so the Buddha was left motherless. It was his mother's sister who took care of him in his early years. And he showed all the signs of being, a great son. He became, as it says here, he excelled in all the arts. He was, incredibly intelligent. He was great in arts and sports. And the king was, had lots of hopes for him. But because he had this fear that he would leave the kingdom, because he could also see that his son was a very sensitive, compassionate being, the king kind of secluded him in the palace and wouldn't let him go out of the palace. And he always surrounded him with like beautiful young women and with, all the sort of pleasures of life. He gave the son everything he wanted, so he wouldn't want to leave the kingdom and be quite happy to take over the kingdom from his father when his father was no longer able. So again, this is just depicting the sort of very comfortable, princely life of the Buddha in this form here. So the next deed is showing that, so around about the age of, I think, early 20s, the king also married. And on top of marrying, he also had a lot of, his own harem of women, as was the case in those days. So again, he was just surrounded with all the pleasures you could ever wish for. But at some point, the son became a little bit curious about what was going on outside the palace walls. So he asked his attendant to take him outside one time, and his attendant sort of sneaked him out of the palace. And at that time, he was able to come across some of the sights of, not so fortunate beings who also lived in his kingdom. So as it says here, he came across an old man, a sick man, and the body of a dead man. And of course, his father had sheltered him from all these different kinds of more grosser sufferings in the kingdom. So he was quite, he was very shocked to see that. I mean, he hadn't really come across that in his life. Even in Western society, we don't talk about death. We try to cover it up. This is basically because it's something we don't really understand, We don't have a deep understanding of. But his father protected him more because he was concerned that he was going to go and, engage in a spiritual life and leave the kingdom. So anyway, that's what happened is after seeing that, and the last image he saw, or the last person he saw, was actually a holy being or an ascetic, who was practicing, who'd given up this life and who was practicing the spiritual path. So that, after seeing someone who was sick, someone who was who had died, someone who was aging. And then on the last person he saw was someone who was in the process of, who had given up this life, who was living a simple life, meditation. The Buddha, went back to the kingdom, and after, considering for some time, decided that he had to leave the kingdom. He decided that, upon seeing birth, old age, sickness, and death, there doesn't seem to be much. His life seemed kind of futile, if this is what the experience, what was ahead of him, was simply to experience death. So it's a very, when I heard that story, for me, it was quite a refreshing way to look at life, because for myself, I hadn't thought about life like that before, that basically, death, old age is suffering, sickness is suffering. It's not something I had really, in our Western society, it's not something we discuss, and we're taught about at school. So I thought it was a really, refreshing way to look at life and think about it in that way. And especially the Buddha himself giving up so much comfort in order to go engage in a sort of spiritual and ascetic life. So on the eve of his wife was actually pregnant, and on the eve when she gave birth to it was one or two nights after she'd given birth to their first child, he decided that he was so moved by seeing suffering, by seeing birth, old age, sickness, and death, that for him, there was no choice but to go out and find a solution to that, find liberation or freedom from that problem or dynamic that not only he was in, but he could see all beings were in. So he left the kingdom. And he, went into the mountains. He gave up his robes. He passed his robes. His attendant drove him into the mountains. And he cut his hair. He gave all his robes, everything he passed over to his, horsemen, who then went, took them back to the kingdom. And he just donned some very simple rags and clothes, went into the forest and sought out some spiritual teachers. So it says here, the two teachers in the one previous, the two teachers that he sought were Arada and Udraka. They were the sort of higher gurus that were available at that time. So as you can see in this picture, first of all, he studied under them for some time, and he was able to develop very quickly the qualities and realizations that they already had, and they were very happy with him. He was like their best student. But somehow for him, these were I think they were more based on the Hindu teachings at the time that were available. And they brought the Buddha to very high levels of sort of mental bliss or concentration. But somehow he realized that, this isn't liberation. It's not freedom from suffering. It doesn't bring about the fruits of total understanding in my mind of phenomena, the oneness of all beings. It doesn't bring about that experience. And he felt that there was something deeper that he had to achieve, within himself. So he left both of those teachers and he joined with these 5 ascetics who were practicing a path of severe asceticism, where you basically neglect the body and all its needs, with the idea that by neglecting and abandoning the body, one can liberate the mind. The mind will become some sort of self-liberated, from suffering. So the Buddha taught that to practice that for over 6 years until he became, as we can see in this image, complete skin and bone, near death, near physical and mental exhaustion, near death. Because he was driven by this, not just for himself, but this kind of strong wish, not for just himself, but free all beings from suffering and the causes of suffering. And again, at that time, the teachings he had come across weren't satisfying him completely with the result of liberation. So this is the path he chose with his 5 ascetic friends or disciples. But then he decided after 6 years of studying that and practicing that extremely, that this was also the wrong path. So one day he was, meditating with his ascetic disciples, and he had some kind of epiphany or realization that, this isn't the right way. This is too extreme. It's his body, so I should utilize it and not abandon it completely, neglect it completely. I need this vessel. Also, there's some connection between the mind and body where I need this vessel to be able to achieve enlightenment. So he decided to go and bathe. He bathed in the river. There was a village lady who happened to come by at the time, called Sujata. You can actually visit that place in India as well. It's one of the pilgrimages places, where she offered him a gruel, which he hadn't taken anything like that for many, many years. He had just lived off of seeds, berries, whatever came, simple things that came in the forest, but he hadn't really had some sort of proper meal for many years. So he partook of that, and the 5 ascetics kind of saw him and thought, oh my gosh, what a loser. They thought, he's just, he's abandoned the path, he's taken food, he's having a bath, he must have given up. So they kind of lost hope in him, and they decided to go their own way. And they went off to this place in Varanasi, and where at Sarnath, where there was a lot of ascetic practitioners there, and they joined there and decided, we'll just go our own way. And Buddha decided to walk to this place, Bodh Gaya. He walked along the river and he came to the place called Bodh Gaya, and feeling sort of more nourished and sustained by the food that he had received, he made this determination that no matter what happens, I'm going to practice to achieve enlightenment. So you can visit the tree today. It's not the actual tree, but it's a descendant of the tree in Bodh Gaya, where the stupa was built also in the memory of the Buddha's enlightenment. And right next to the stupas, there's the tree. So you can go and, be around there and be at the place where the Buddha achieved enlightenment. He sat under this Bodhi tree. Bodhi meaning awakening. And he just sat there and decided, no matter what comes up, I'm just going to sit here till I really discover the truth about myself, about reality, about the nature of all phenomena and the nature of my mind. So he single-pointedly sat there for 6 weeks. And this image here is just showing like all the sort of final delusions, what we could call like the subtle obscurations that come up, and the kind of temptations that can come up as you just really decide to sit there. There's many obstacles that come up, but it shows the Buddha just fighting them off with kind of flowers, all these demons and maras and obstacles just coming in, and he's kind of transforming them into flowers. They didn't affect his mind, his mental peace and stability. So after 6 weeks of sitting at the Bodhi tree, he was able to achieve full enlightenment on the 15th day of the 4th month. So right now we're in the period of celebrating certain miracles that the Buddha performed during his lifetime. But the day of Sakadawa, which comes up usually around May time, which is again the 15th day of the 4th month, the full moon on the 4th Tibetan month. So the Tibetan month, or the Asian calendar, goes by the lunar month, so it changes each year. But we celebrate the Buddha's awakening each year, called Sakadawa, around May, sometimes it's early June. And again, here we see the pictures of the stupa. which was built there some 100 years after when the Buddha, to celebrate and to be a memory, a holy place for people to go and study, to practice, to pay homage to. So the Buddha achieved full enlightenment on this day. And at that time, what he had discovered, he felt was so profound. Not that he didn't want to share it with others, not that he didn't want to teach, but he wasn't sure that the humans in the world at the time would have the karma to hear the teachings, to understand them. So there's these beings. I think the image, we don't have the image here. There is an image. Oh, well, it shows you in some way here, actually, it does show you. So, but while the Buddha was under the tree, these beings or devas from different realms could see what the Buddha was, thinking and considering, and came down and asked the Buddha. Here we have an image of them offering a Dharma wheel or a conch. These are different things that are often offered to the Buddha, or offered at teachings, to ask to teach, please teach what you know. So at this time, these beings came down and said to the Buddha, please, or, give the teachings to the beings in the human world, that there's many beings who will understand and achieve realizations from these teachings. So the Buddha accepted that. And from Bodh Gaya, he walked to this place of Varanasi where the 5 ascetics had went. And he, as he was walking towards the park, a place called Sarnath, and where this stupa on the left side is actually built as well, in this place of Sarnath, he walked to, he walked into the park, and the 5 ascetics just sort of looked at him and realized, through the power of light and his presence, that he had achieved some kind of realization or power, special quality. And they immediately prostrated to him, made offerings, and asked him to turn the wheel of Dharma. So at that time, he taught the first teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And again, this is another day that we celebrate in the life of the Buddha. It comes around July, August, where we celebrate the day when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma and gave this first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. So this is him here teaching the 5 ascetic disciples. And then the Buddha walked around India for another 50 years. He achieved enlightenment in his mid-30s. And for around 45, 50, up to almost 50 years, he walked around teachings and turning wheel of Dharma. And, it said he's given up to 84,000 sets of teachings during that time. So that he devoted his life to giving teachings. And at the age of 80, after that was given by a benefactor, that actually was some kind of, the food was kind of contaminated, so the Buddha could see that with his clairvoyance, but out of his compassion, he still wanted to partake of the food. So he took the food for the benefactors, but asked all his other disciples not to take the food, because anyway, he had decided at that time he was going to pass away. So he partook of the food, and he after some days of sickness, he passed away at another holy place in India called Kushinagar, which you can also visit, and you can see a statue similar to this of the Buddha in the lying pose, as it's the pose that he passed away in. And he told his disciples at that time that, as everything does in samsara, everything ends. There's impermanence in everything that exists. And similarly, I'm passing away at this time. And what's left for you is that you have to practice the teachings that I have given. So this is just a brief synopsis of what the Buddha's life story, with some of those beautiful images there that we we're very fortunate to be able to see it in Land of Medicine Buddha. So I'll go back to the slideshow. Hold on. Not try again. Okay. How are we doing so far? Is there any questions or comments? Something not clear?
It was good. I have one question about at the end it says that he produced relics that were divided into
Yes.
8 holy places. Where are those places? Do you know?
I'm not sure where they are, but I do know, I mean, there's some places and I think one of the places is in Sarnath. I know that you can go there and receive. Sarnath's the place where the Buddha went to teach the 5 ascetic disciples. And so I know that you can see one of the relics of the Buddha there. Actually, Lama Zopa Rinpoche has, we had the relic tour happening in FPMT for many years as well. So we have quite a few relics within that tour. There was quite a few relics that Lama Zopa Rinpoche had also been given to the Buddha. So you've probably seen one of the relics of the Buddha already.
They were at his place.
Well, certainly the relic tour came to, when it came to Land of Medicine Buddha, I'm
Huh.
sure that, because Rinpoche had at least 1, 2, or 3 relics of the Buddha.
Wow.
So I think most of us here who have been to the relic tour would have seen or been in the presence of a relic of the Buddha.
Okay, thank you. Mhm.
And I'm sure there's probably relics in each of those holy places, because I know at Sarnath there is one. I'm pretty sure, I've been to Kusinagar as well, but it was over 20 years ago. But I'm almost certain there's a relic of the Buddha there. And I would imagine Shavasti, there's, these different places where the Buddha spent periods of time that are quite significant. So I think most of those holy places will have relics. But for us in the West, if we've been to the relic tour with Rinpoche, then we would have come across, we would have certainly been in the presence of some of those relics.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any not clear? Anyone else wants to share? Okay. So,
One thing I
yes.
just have to let you know, I have to pick up my daughter from soccer at like 8:15, so I'm gonna
You
try
have
to
to
keep
leave.
listening on my phone, but
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
just
okay.
why I have to
That's
early.
what happens, yeah.
But thank you.
Okay, so this was actually, it was a little bit too much to go back and forward, but I did find an image of the Buddha. I found an image of the Buddha online where the Queen Maya was giving birth to Lord Buddha. And this is kind of one image of the Buddha. She's obviously not experiencing a lot of pain there as she's standing holding on to the tree. And you see these different images of the Buddha supposedly these lotuses appeared from his feet. And he was able to stand up and express that he was going to, there's different words different people say, but basically that he was kind of supreme in this world and he would, relieve suffering. So it was quite incredible. And of course, the Buddha, of course, even in Christianity, around the birth of Jesus, there's all these miraculous signs. And of course, the teachings of Christ or Jesus, what he taught at that time is still over here over 2,000 years later. So it's quite signs around the birth of a holy being. So it might seem like some kind of fable, but when we really think about it, to be able to have the wisdom, to be able to have the level of, the karma, the merit, to be able to, propound teachings that still exist in the world 2,500 years later is quite incredible. So I think for sure there's going to be some miraculous signs around the birth of that kind of holy being, wouldn't you think? So anyway, that was just in a nutshell the life story of the Buddha. I think, what really comes out of that for me is that I think about how the Buddha would have been able to see suffering so clearly like that. He must have been a great holy being because, for us, without being told, as we're going to go through the Four Noble Truths, there's no way we would be able to say, I don't think so, really discover, from our own side, that actually, old age is a suffering. It's something we tend to think it's just normal. Usually in our life, growing up, it's like, okay, people get old, people get sick, we just see it in a sort of ordinary view, you know, there's not necessarily this kind of deep level of questioning and this kind of penetrative insight that the Buddha had into that. Because he didn't come, he wasn't brought up, his father secluded him from any kind of spiritual life, you know, he kept him well secluded in the palace and gave him everything he wants. So there was nothing he wanted for in that respect. But still he had this kind of, you know, because he was a holy being, you know, already coming into this world, he had a deep sensitivity to suffering, you know, and the problems that exist in the human realm. So I found that kind of really, I don't know, that really struck a chord for me when I heard the teaching, that life story of the Buddha the first time, you know, how he was able to just penetrate that and see that. What would that mind be like? That freshness, that clarity into birth being suffering, death being suffering, you know, old age being suffering. I mean, of course, we know it's a suffering. Nobody wants it. But to be able to think maybe there's a way out of that, to go that step further is quite incredible, really, you know, to have that insight. And then also, you know, to have the kind of mind or brave heart to abandon the kingdom and just go off into the forest. I mean, you've lived a life of complete comfort, leisure, everything you could ever hope for. And also he was looking at, you know, taking over a whole kingdom, which in some levels a big responsibility, but on another level, it's like he would have had still all the pleasures and luxuries at that time as the higher royal noble classes did have, you know. There wasn't much chance that would. So for him also to have that bravery to just abandon all that and just go into the forest with nothing, it's like unbelievable. It's a lot. It's kind of very moving to think about that, you know, what the Buddha, he showed the deed of sacrificing all that in a level for us, you know, to bring about his own inner transformation so he could share it with us, with the world, you know, and achieve the deepest full awakening and share it with us. So it's incredible, as, you know, many holy beings go through, you know, even as we have to go through, you know, some sort of sacrifice in order to be of this like incredible benefit in this world for so many thousands of years as well. So, you know, I find it very helpful it really inspires me when I think, you know, try to think a bit more deeply from time to time about the life story of the Buddha, including my own spiritual teacher, our spiritual teacher for many of us, you know, as we know, he gave up so much comfort for us, you know. So it can be a great inspiration to reflect and rejoice in the life stories of holy beings. So next one, as the topic of today is more about, I think most of you here will be, you know, have quite a lot of familiarity with the Four Noble Truths. And some of you here may not have much familiarity, because I noticed a couple of other people joined in. So I might ask you at the end of the class what your understanding is. But I know a couple of you already who are here already have done some study. So again, what we're just going to go through is just a sort of basic, maybe we'll just make it very basic, going through the Four Noble Truths, to again just refresh our understanding for those of us who know already, and for those of us who don't know, just getting a little bit insight into this first teaching that the Buddha discovered and taught to his 5 ascetic disciples. So maybe Urs, just in a nutshell, what would you understand with since, you know, we've not got like brand new students here, and might call upon some, if you're comfortable from time to time, just in a couple of sentences, what would you understand by the first truth of suffering?
I mean, it was the first teaching, obviously, of the Buddha, and I mean, that was, I think, the purpose why he came to this world system, to actually eliminate suffering. So I mean, he pointed out that many things we experience is actually suffering, even pleasure that we experience, even a good meal, good food, good company, is not really ultimately satisfying. So there's an element of suffering in that. And I think that's the first one, the truth of suffering. And then the cause of suffering.
We'll stick to the truth of suffering first, Urs, thank you. But I will ask you about the cause of suffering. Ruth, do you mind me asking you, just in a nutshell, if you've got anything else you can add about the truth of suffering?
Well, I think just that our human life is suffering, and that's really a realization or an acknowledgement, I guess, that it is suffering, that is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So another I like this and I haven't heard it many times, but someone gave me this in touching on what you're saying, Ruth, is the 4 truths for Arya beings. I don't know if you've heard that kind of translation before. So the 4 Noble Truths is, yeah, it's basically what the Buddha, through his, not just that lifetime of spiritual practice, but actually, it says let's just say many lifetimes of spiritual practice that the Buddha engaged in, he was able to discover these, 4 truths, or 4 truths for Arya beings. So an Arya being is basically someone who has realized the nature, realized reality, has a realization of the ultimate nature of all phenomena, of ourselves and all phenomena. That's an Arya being in simple terms. So the 4 truths for Aryas mean that, as we are slowly studying and practicing the teachings, they gradually, step by step become truths for us. But for Arya beings, it's just exactly how they see reality, There's no, now we are kind of step by step getting, some kind of intellectual understanding, some kind of, heart realization understanding. But for Aryas, it's like, that's exactly how they see. When they look, again, with a fresh mind upon our existence, what they see is it's pervaded by suffering, as you were touching on, Ruth. So the truth of suffering, yeah, it's kind of, when we first hear the teachings of the Buddha, there's a lot of discomfort, because it's like, one of my friends was saying that, when he was quite new in the Dharma, and you go to these teachings and you're suffering and suffering and suffering. And so he was attending a teaching with, I think one quite high Lama. I don't remember which one, but he said there was another person in the audience, and he, at some point, it came across, if there's any questions. So one person, he put up his hand and he said, "Why do you keep talking about suffering all the time?" He was kind of like, "This is a bit much, And the Lama says, "Well, if you were happy, you wouldn't be here." And I think that has a lot of meaning, It's like, basically, if we weren't seeking some kind of more stable happiness, we wouldn't approach or attend a teaching, So anyway, yeah, the truth of suffering is basically, as we're going to go through, there's different types of suffering that we experience as humans in this realm that the Buddha discovered, So as Urs was saying, we're sort of conditioned. Oh, sorry, I went ahead. That's too far forward. As Urs was saying, we're sort of conditioned, we're very wired, not just in society. We can't just blame society and the media and, it's all my family or this or that, that we have this kind of, over dependence on external things to make us happy. It's true that with this particular lifestyle and age that we're in, there's a very strong dependence or conditioning or wiring into thinking that, happiness is going to exist somewhere out there with some friend, with some material possession, with some job. It's just blame it on that. Where we have to really look is, the fact that, as the Buddha was teaching, our mind's been conditioned with this kind of way of thinking and feeling and being over many lifetimes. So we come into this life also with this kind of habitual tendency of achieve some kind of inner peace and happiness, some kind of satisfaction. So on this premise, you know, this is where the Buddha was an extreme example of having all of the things that we potentially want to try and get. You know, he had everything. There's nothing, even in our Western day society, there's nothing the Buddha had that he had everything, you know, there's nothing more than that we could really have, I don't think. He had a beautiful wife. You know, his father did love him. He had loving parents. They all loved and adored him. But father just didn't want him to go outside the kingdom, you know? So he was kind of clinging to him to be there. So he had a great family. He had all the great teachers. He had as much, you know, female company as he wanted, including a loving wife. He didn't really have any kind of heavy challenges or difficulties in his life. So on some level, that's quite profound, you know. He exhausted all the external sources of pleasure or comfort there could be. And he basically gave that all up because he understood that was all very transitory. He had this kind of deep, especially upon seeing birth, old age, sickness and death, and realizing actually he was in a precarious situation, experiencing that himself, that then he had to find a solution to that. So I find that, I find that reflection quite helpful, you know, that the Buddha himself that had, you know, exhausted all the pleasures, exhausted all the comforts, and had some kind of deep, what we call renunciation, clarity or understanding that none of that was going to produce everlasting peace and happiness, you know. It wasn't going to be found out there in any of those objects. So So again, the Buddha left the world, and he left the kingdom, and he went off to kind of, I think, really investigate not just like what's the path to happiness, but even more, I think, what he discovered first of all was like, well, what's the obstacle to us achieving happiness? So we have everlasting, you know, we have this potential for everlasting peace and happiness. That's what the Buddha discovered, you know, the deep peace of liberation and enlightenment, freedom from all suffering and the causes of suffering. So how the teachings are presented and how we have to continually reflect and meditate as we're trying to develop some kind of renunciation, some kind of deep renunciation really comes from a deeper understanding and feeling our own dissatisfactory situation. Not so much externally, but more internally. So first of all, you know, the Buddha taught the first two truths more or less to sort of diagnose the situation that we're in. Just as if, you know, we have a long-term, like alcoholics, you know, they have a long-term abuse problem. So in order for them to really, you know, gain some wish to be free of that, they have to have a deep kind of sense of their own suffering, you know, what's going on here, and you know, they really feel the pain of that, and then something inspires them then to be able to get out of that problem. They go and get rehab, they do all the things they need to do. So, you know, what happens here, we have some idea of suffering, whereas I'll have a deeper idea, but what we're trying to do here is get a very, very more extensive view through studying suffering and the causes of suffering, because the more extensive we understand our suffering situation is, the more we want to get out of it. Just like an alcoholic who's really deeply felt, you know, the pain of being an alcoholic, maybe he's lost his family, he's lost his kids, he's lost his money, like he goes over and over again, all the things that have happened to me because I've become an alcoholic, you know, if he's out on the streets, that can bring about a huge like momentum to be able to get out of it. So why the Buddha taught the two truths first is so that we can really get a more extensive view of what's going on with ourselves. You know, we have some idea that life's dissatisfactory, but getting a deeper understanding of that brings about a very a sort of deeper momentum or motivation, or what we call kind of this feeling of renunciation, this wish to get out of it and find, you know, and to practice the path, as it says here, you know. The truth is suffering, the truth of the cause is suffering, the truth is cessation, and the truth of the past. So it's kind of like the first two truths are the bad news. And the second two truths are the good news, you know. Yes, we're suffering and there's causes of suffering, but there's also a path to freedom and liberation. So that's what the last two truths are expressing. But first of all, what we kind of approach in the first two, as we go through the order that the Buddha taught, we're just going to go through the order of the, just in a sort of brief way, you know, to get, again, just see how true what the Buddha taught is for us. Go through and more enumerated what the Buddha expressed in terms of being the main kind of sufferings that we're engaged in or involved in. So there's 6 general sufferings, as we can see here. 6 general suffering, nothing is definite, especially our lifespan. So again, this is also going back to the life story of the Buddha. This is what the Buddha saw when he came out of the kingdom. He saw that, you know, what is the purpose of having all this pleasure and enjoyment when it's not going to, first of all, it doesn't bring about satisfaction, but more immediately, it's not going to last, you know. We all have to finish this life, we all have to leave, you know, so there doesn't seem to be any, it's very transitory, superficial. Nothing in samsara gives everlasting satisfaction. So again, this is a little bit what my Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to hint on this. Oh, can you see that there? Can you see the sidebar? What I can't see it because of the, let me just move this a little bit here. Rinpoche would always use the example of Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones. Because even in modern day music, even musicians, of course, musicians, when they write music, they always tend to, you know, write about, or poetry, it tends to express kind of deeper frustrations in life. Issues or problems or challenges that they're going through. So when Rinpoche talks about the second suffering, he always mentions this song that the Mick Jagger talked about, and we all know with the Stones, you know, I mean, they took drugs, they experimented and everything, you know, and still he's talking about not getting any satisfaction, you know. So this is what Urs was bringing about. This is what Urs was talking about. And one aspect is suffering, the suffering nature of samsara, samsaric pleasures. They don't have the power to satisfy us. And of course, some of you have had many teachings on this about, Venerable Rubina talks about the chocolate cake and how, you know, we have one slice of chocolate cake and it's really nice. And after 2 slices of chocolate cake, we get a bit full. And after 3 slices of chocolate cake, you start to feel like sick, you know, or maybe it takes a bit more than that, I don't know. But this is one of the examples of samsaric pleasures not bringing any satisfaction. And in fact, not bringing satisfaction, but if we really, again, investigate the process of enjoying samsaric pleasures, the first bite's delicious. The second, third, fourth bite is less delicious. The second slice of cake is is okay. And then again, but the third one, we're actually starting to suffer, you know, it's not comfortable. We can actually sit and meditate on that, you know, it's like, it's the same as if we go to the beach, you know. Oh, it's so nice, you know, I love the sun, we sit in the sun, it's so comfortable. But, you know, after 20 minutes, it starts to get a wee bit uncomfortable. You feel the heat in your skin, you know, it doesn't feel so nice after a while. Then if you sit there too long, you might get a bit too red or your skin might dry up, or, you know, it's like, so we go into the shade to cool off, and that feels nice for a little bit. But then after a while, it's not comfortable either. You know, we might get a bit too cold. So actually, there's a lot of sensitivity that goes on around. It's not easy to kind of balance and get the right effect from these sensual pleasures because they're only usually they're only usually pleasurable for a very, very short time, and extremely short when we really check up. The sun, the cool breeze, it feels nice for a very short time. And then it kind of turns into something less satisfactory or sort of boring or uncomfortable. And relationships, wow, this person's so great. I love them so much, you know. And of course, some of us can develop a deep love for the other person in the relationship. But mostly, you know, we find that relationships can many of the time become quite a cause of suffering for us and frustration and dissatisfaction. You know, we don't quite get what we were expecting out of that relationship. Do you think? Leaving the body again and again. So this comes from, again, the premise, which we haven't really touched on, but again, most of us here who have already studied the teaching, studied some of Discovering Buddhism, will know that, you know, where the Buddha, you know, our mind has, we've had many lifetimes. This isn't our first lifetime. We've had many lifetimes of up and down, different samsaric states, being in the human realm, being in other realms of existence. And each time, because we haven't liberated ourselves from samsara, we haven't got out of suffering, we have to take rebirth again due to the power of karma and delusion, which again we'll touch on when we come to the causes of suffering. So these are all intermingled, really, suffering and the causes of suffering. But because we haven't been able to free the mind, liberate the mind from the causes of suffering, then we have this situation where we're kind of reborn again and again, taking different bodies in this realm. And that's where we touch upon, maybe we can go over to the Wheel of Life here, which again, most of you are familiar with. But this Wheel of Life is depicting this kind of cycle of samsaric existence that we're in, where we're continually so Mara is this kind of scary being that's holding the wheel, the Lord of Death. He depicts the Lord of Death that we're all under the control of. We're constantly under the control of uncontrolled death. We're under the power of uncontrolled death and rebirth. That's really the nature of samsara, the nature of suffering, that we don't have control or the power from our mind to control where we're reborn, how we're reborn, and we haven't developed the control of the power of mind to determine, you know, our future rebirths. So basically, this is what we're trying to do in the teachings of the Buddha, develop that control, that power, you know, and we have the power. Liberation is in our hand. That power is in our hand. But of course, we need to study and practice and meditate in the teachings and create that inner cause, these inner causes within ourselves. But right now, as much as we can reflect and meditate on what our situation is right now, again, similar to like an alcoholic, they might go into the rehab and they're like, yeah, I'm going to get out of this, you know. I'm really suffering now. My family, my friends, everybody's abandoned me. You know, my mental state's really difficult. But, you know, as the rehabilitation's difficult, they might want to get out. Like, no, wait a minute, this is too hard, you know. So again, they have to go back to this reflection on, but why am I here? You know, what is my situation? So until we kind of, you know, really think about these first, you know, the truth of suffering in a deeper way, our motivation to get out of suffering will be less. The more we think about suffering and the causes of suffering and how it impacts us, and we get an experience of how suffering and the causes of suffering exist in our own mind and our own experience, that much more we will have renunciation. That much more we want to get out of the state that we're in. Just like, it's like similar, it's very fundamental. It's like similar to a cancer patient, you know, that much more. Of course, cancer's kind of cancer, the doctors told you that you have this, and we already know, oh, gosh, I wouldn't want to die younger than I am from cancer. So that gives a lot of momentum to, you know, to do all the practices, to take all the medication, you know. But even though you're going through the process, it would be hard, you know, going through all the treatments and the process, but you have to think again and again, but I want to get myself free from that. Well, cancer's a very, you know, it's a horrible thing to have, you know, any of these kind of deeper problems or diseases that we can have are horrible. You know, we don't wish that on anyone. But the challenge, you know, samsara, the suffering of samsara is much deeper. You know, it's an internal thing that's not so clear. So it takes a lot of momentum to really get ourselves, you know, to really motivate ourselves to get out of it. So this is why we're encouraged again and again to go through this process of really getting a sort of deeper, clearer understanding internally our own samsaric world. How does our samsara operate? What are the, you know, what are these inner truths that are going on for me about my samsara and my inner suffering? So one of the meditations, you know, there's a very powerful meditation on meditating on leaving the body again and again, where we imagine all our past lives, all the bodies we've taken. If we've had a beginningless stream of consciousness that always takes rebirth in some form or another, we've had mountains of bodies. You know, so we sit and meditate and reflect on that, all the bodies we've taken again and again, all the things we've done again and again. You can develop a sort of, you know, we want to distance ourselves with that, and we want to create the causes that gets us out of there. So 3 and 4 are very similar, you know, taking rebirth again and again. I mean, do we know right now where we're going to take rebirth next? If we've developed some feeling or conviction that our consciousness is this continuum that goes on for life to life, do we you know, we can't say with any conviction where we're going to be reborn again. This is also a suffering, you know, that we don't have control or power over that. We haven't achieved the mental states where we're able to have a real strong effect on our positive rebirth. Moving from higher to lower states in samsara. So a little bit, if we go to the Wheel of Life, we can see this depicted here. So basically in this Wheel of Life, we have the Lord of Death that we're all under the control of. None of us right now have the freedom to be able to kind of guide our death in a certain way. We all, because we've taken this body, it's subject to birth, it's subject to old age, sickness and death. So we're in the grasps of death, you know, and what we're experiencing is this cycle here, this wheel of cyclic existence. So I'm not going to go into too much detail in this class on the wheel, but the main elements here that I think, you know, as I say, a few of us are familiar with, when we're talking about moving from higher to lower states of samsara, the three ones on, so you have the middle wheel, you have the you have the inner spoke or wheel, then you've got the outer one, the black and white one, and then this one, the one where the sort of inner one, which is larger with the 6 segments. The top 3 segments show these higher states of existence, the higher realms that we can be born in. The realm of the human realm is the one on the left. And then there's these 2 other sort of heavenly or God realms that we can be born in. So they're higher. If we create positive karma, good karma, we can be reborn in these higher states. And then the 3 lower segments show the lower realms of existence that we can be born in. Like you know, and there's a hell realm. Even if we can't accept the existence of a hell realm, we can accept that we can be born into hellish, you know, horrible, be born in a human with a horrible existence. You know, there's so many parts of this world right now where they're living in a sort of mini hell. So that's what's helped me to sort of move beyond kind of any resistance I might have about there being some kind of hell realm, is just to think, well, even in the human realm, there exists hellish states of existence, you know, either externally with the environment or internally in terms of people's states of mind that they can go through. Then there's the Preta realm on the left side, the lower left side. And that's a realm where there's an extreme lack of food or drink, food or water. And then there's also the animal realm. So that's a realm see these beings and also see that if we investigate more deeply, you know, the animal realm is not a, you know, many ways, there's a few fortunate animals in terms of, you know, being pets, well looked after or cared for, but mainly speaking, when we investigate more deeply, the animal realm also is pervaded by a lot of suffering and fear. So this is, you know, this wheel is sort of depicting how we move around in these 6 realms from one life to the next, according to our karma, according to what we've created in this and past lives. That's what ripens at the time of death. That's what we were overpowered by at the moment. Kind of the karma that we've created, the causes that we've created that can project us into one of these rebirths. And then the sixth type of suffering, in terms of general suffering, is that when we come into this world, when we enter into the mother's womb or any womb, a mother, we come in alone. And also when we leave this world, we die alone. You know, we go into what we call this place of the bardo state. So and actually, even throughout our life, a lot of us can experience this kind of feeling of loneliness, even when we're in a relationship, even when we have friends and family around us. It's often that people feel lonely, a sense of loneliness. When we're born and when we die, but because of the presence of karma and delusion in our mind, because of not being connected fully with ourselves and with others, and the presence of a strong sense of I or separateness, we often have quite strong feelings of loneliness. So that's a general suffering that many people experience, up to the point of often killing themselves. So this is just giving a bit of a more elaborate idea of what the Buddha taught in terms of the types of suffering that we experience in this realm, you know. Would we agree? Who else is? Does anybody have any questions or comments? Does it sound a bit, for those of you who might not have heard it before or are still going over it, does it sound a little bit extreme? A bit depressing? Marge? Can't see Marge.
Yeah, I'm here. So I think, you know, when I first started going to teachings and doing the classes, but you know, this was 20 years ago, so it's taken a while. But it did seem depressing to me at the beginning. But over time, it becomes comforting. It's become comforting to me to just accept these. I mean, this is just the way it is for everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
So it isn't depressing to me anymore. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here
Yeah.
after all these years. I find it extremely useful.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and I think you're right. You know, the more in the beginning when we hear it, it's like it's kind of a bit overwhelming, and it can feel depressing. You know, but the thing is, once we, as you say, once you kind of get an acceptance of that, it's like, oh yeah, this is how it is.
Right.
And out of that acceptance, I think what we do, there's more mental space to feel like, well, this is how it is, and this is how I have to get out of it. It's almost like, you know, when you first go to the doctor and they tell you you've got all these things, you know, and you go and the doctor says, oh, well, you've got this and that. At the beginning, it's really depressing. But then once you think about it more and you know that the doctor also tells you, as we're going to find out in the next couple of truths, there is a pathway out of it, then it's like, oh, okay, you know, I've got this and that, but there's a hope, you know. So we don't listen to this with kind of some like, oh my God, there's no hope and I'm all done for and I'm never going to get out of this. It's kind of like once we hear the second two truths, then you get this thing like, okay, I'm really happy to hear the whole diagnosis. Then I know what's wrong with me, you know.
Right.
And then I can engage in the practices and the path to be able to free myself from that. But I think without having the whole diagnosis, we wouldn't have the momentum to really, really keep going with the practice, you know, because we see there's a big problem here. There's a deeper problem than we thought at first. Make sense?
Yes, it makes sense to me.
Ruth, you got any comments? We're into comment time, no? Urs? Not really?
Well, I mean, the third kind of suffering is the most depressing, this all-pervasive suffering, because I mean that's that basically it says all-pervasive, so there's really nothing, no happiness in this world, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, we're going to touch on that one next week because the three types of suffering are really they are the all-pervasive ones, you know, that's in everything. The first six ones, as it says, it's the more general kind of periphery ones that's going on on the periphery. But the three types of suffering really gets into the nuts and bolts of what's going on, you know. And it does, it's kind of that one, as you say, it's more kind of it can be more depressing because basically it is telling us that our body and mind are in the nature of suffering, you know, everything. We're not having a moment of release from that, you know. It doesn't mean that we don't experience moments of joy and happiness. It's not like that, you know. But when we really investigate deeply, there's a kind of constant frustration going on all the time that's deeply ingrained in our body and mind, deeply contaminated in the body and mind. But it doesn't. But again, as we go into the second two truths, there's a path. There is a complete path to liberate us from that. So this week I'm not going to touch on that. We'll go through next week a little bit more deeply with three types of suffering. To touch on that one. But there's also a lady called Ruth, not Ruth, Marge, Bay, Urs, who else? Namasia, have you got any other questions? Because I'm wondering how much, have you had teachings on the Four Noble Truths before?
I've heard of them. I've read a few things, but no, I haven't taken a teaching on it yet. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. Different sufferings, yeah. It's suffering, it's life. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing in it that's not, would you say that there's nothing there is there anything there that's not true? That it's like not really, doesn't make sense within the six general sufferings?
No, it all makes sense. It's all very true. You know, it's truth.
It's truth, yeah.
Yeah.
Bay, do you have any comments or additions you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think for me it's just because it's so true that it's the fact that it's so true is a suffering.
It's just what? Depressing?
It is depressing, yeah. Because it's so true.
Yeah. It's kind of like, really? This is all going on with me, you know? Anyway, this is just the first, as I say, this is how the Buddha decided to teach it, you know. He needed to enumerate what all the problems and issues were, you know, so that again, we would have this kind of strong impetus based on the fundamental nature of the mind being pure. So the fundamental nature of mind has the ability to be completely liberated for this. So we'll just end on a positive note, you know, before we go into more sufferings. we have to always go back to the fact that the fundamental nature of our mind is pure and knowing. It has the ability, as the Buddha showed in the 12 deeds, you know, to be completely liberated for all these different types of suffering and dissatisfaction in our life. Each one of us has that fundamental potential in our mind for awakening. But right now, just like like the mirror is covered with dust, you know, we're not able to access that because we have this dust or grime or dirt or contamination, karma and delusion in the mind. And this is how the contamination basically is. The main contaminations are the cause. So that's the main contamination. That's the main dust, the grime, the dirt that's overwhelming or polluting or covering our basic essential nature that's pure, clear knowing and has the capacity for everlasting peace and happiness, everlasting wisdom and joy and compassion, all these positive qualities that we have in small amounts right now. Each one of us, maybe, and I'm sure some of you have bigger amounts than I do, you know, even though I've been, you know, we've been practicing definitely for some lifetimes, each of us, you know, to have met these teachings again, to have the karma, to be able to hear them, to be able to have some connection with them, for them to resonate for us. We've heard them in the past, you know, so it's, we've already developed, you know, to some extent, our wisdom that's able to understand suffering, our wisdom that's able to understand that there's a path to liberate us from that. We have these imprints in the mind because we're able to hear these teachings and we're able to understand them on a certain level and practice and realize them in a certain capacity right now. So that's the positive side, you know, we have this potential. And we have these imprints that we've created in past lives, you know, that is bringing us to this point, bringing us to this human lifestyle, this human life. You know, it's not easy to get a human life. There's many analogies that kind of show us that just to get a human existence, when we think about the number of animals that there are in this world, who also have consciousness, who also experience suffering, but who also have the potential to liberate themselves and achieve all the qualities of a Buddha, you know, fully develop wisdom and compassion. Just thinking about the number of animals that exist just in a, you know, an ant heap, the number of insects that are in an ant heap, you know, that number alone, just thinking about that, they're born in that state. And you know how I have been able to, you know, through the power of their karma and delusion. But yet, yeah, as a human, I as a, not just a human, but, you know, to be able to understand the Dharma, to be able to have some aspiration to practice, that's all incredibly good fortune, you know, that we have, unbelievable good fortune, something that we need to, you know, myself include, every day I try to remember precious human rebirth, you know, I try, because it's what motivates me, you know, when you get lazy and you're like, oh, things are okay, and, you know, maybe I'm doing okay as a nun, and you get, you know, we all get lazy, you know, but when I think about, you know, the number of animals there are, the number, not just the number of humans that don't have access to these teachings, the number of humans that are, you know, incredible suffering right now in the world, in the wars, just in the wars in the human realms alone, you know. And every moment I can have access to these teachings, I can practice these teachings, you know, to whatever level I am. And gradually create the causes in this and future lives to meet the teachings and to get myself out of suffering. We're so fortunate, you know, unbelievable fortunate. I think also last weekend, not last weekend, 2 weekends ago, we had our 40th anniversary or commemoration of Lama Yeshe, our founder, passing away. I don't know if any of you joined in on Zoom for any of the events. But anyway, even Ossel was saying, you know, we have like the karma of an emperor. We don't see that, but we really do, you know. We're like mini emperors. Because we have the main privilege that we have in that respect is we have, you know, there's this, everybody talks about black privilege and white privilege, you know, these terms come around, but I feel like we have Dharma privilege. We have the privilege and the karma, the uniqueness of our situation to be able to have access to these teachings and to be able to gather what any kind of insight and imprint we can for this life and future lives is just incredible. So just to, just take a moment to really feel our good fortune as we finish the class. Try to really connect with that, whatever understanding we have of our preciousness of our human life. So we don't end on suffering. We still remember it and reflect on it, but also to give us energy to get us out of this situation of samsara, this cycle of death and rebirth, to bring joy and inspiration is to remember that we ourselves have also created this special situation that we're in, to be able to serve the teachings as Bay and Urs have in many ways, serving the Dharma, to be able to practice the Dharma, and to be able gradually to bring about these inner realizations of the Four Noble Truths in our hearts and minds. It's a very, very precious situation and moment in our life that we have, to be able to do that. And just as I have this kind of Dharma privilege, may I use it, we can dedicate that we use it in the best way, the most optimum way for ourselves, and that we can eventually, develop all the causes and realizations in our hearts and minds, not just liberate bodhicitta, that we also have incredible good merit just to hear the word bodhicitta, to have some sort of faith in the word bodhicitta, this awakening mind that has all the powers and qualities and deep care for sentient beings, as we see in the examples of our spiritual teachers. May I be able to develop that, and then also, be able to free all the countless living beings, all the animals, all the human realm beings, all the different realms of beings and realms of existence, not just in this world system, but there's many, many countless world systems. May I eventually have all the qualities and realizations and power, like the Buddha achieved, to be able to guide and liberate and enlighten all sentient beings. Chanju Senjo Rinpoche Magi Panam Gyurshi Gewa Nyamba Mebaya Gone Gondu Pelwar Sho. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So this is the book that I was recommending that you read. I don't know if anybody, The Four Noble Truths. Has anyone read that? It's a book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Can you see it? On your screen, yeah.
Yeah.
However, based on the class, that I know that a lot of the class, oh, sorry, here we go, Four Noble Truths. I couldn't see myself. Anyway, this is a wonderful book. It does enumerate very nicely in a not too complicated a way that, really more the Four Noble Truths, and in a very practical way as well, how we can see them in our life, and how we can achieve them in our heart and minds. So this is a wonderful book. But I also think, based on the class here, and I know that you have a little bit more prior knowledge than I was expecting. And Namasya you do as well, Namasya, because you've just been around the Dharma so much. We'll probably finish off with the Four Noble Truths a wee bit more quickly than I was expecting. Classes on renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. Just touch on each of those. Because actually this was a class just to kind of introduce to the Discovering Buddhism class that's going to start happening at the end of March or something, I think it is, Bea.
Yes, March 26th.
So this was just kind of an introduction to the Four Noble Truths and to, the path as we go into the Discovering Buddhism class, which goes through in much more detail all the different points and aspects of the path. So I think, as I say, next week we're going to just, sort of finish off the Four Noble Truths and then go maybe a little bit more into each of the main points of the path, the three aspects of the path that we really need to develop to get free suffering, you know, the renunciation, the Lamrim, you know, which basically means in a nutshell the 3 principles of the path of renunciation, what that really means, how we develop it, bodhicitta, and also the wisdom realizing emptiness. So we're going to go over those in the last, you know, starting probably from later in the class next week in the last 3 classes. I'll go into them in more detail. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
wonderful
Thank you.
week. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.